Hey guys, welcome to Punky's World. This is the ultimate history of video games. Now, I'm gonna stand over so I can put the book somewhere. It's a big book. What I'm gonna do is, first of all, what year did this book come out? It looks like it's fairly new. 2001. No, it's not new. It's over 20 years old. Okay. They have like a timeline here of when video games came out. Wow. Alright, let's see. Capcom was founded in 1979. Atari released Lunar Lander, its first vector graphics game, not sure what that means. Later that year, Atari releases Asteroids, the company's all-time best-selling game. And the first Easter egg was done that year by Atari game designer Warren Robinette, who introduced the Easter egg by putting an extra room in the video game called Adventure for Atari with his name in the room, which is kind of neat. In 1980, Space Invaders was released. Home versions of arcade games were just starting that year. In 1981, Nintendo releases the arcade game Donkey Kong, and Atari releases Pac-Man for the video computer system. And Atari releases Tempest. And US arcade revenues at that time were $5 billion with a B. Let's see. Nintendo releases the Famicom in Japan. Now, the Famicom is the Nintendo, but it's a little bit different in Japan. But it is the NES that we know as the original NES. But in Japan, it was called the Famicom for family computer. And it... Oh, I didn't realize that. 1984, the Atom computer was done by Coleco. Now, we know Coleco for other toys. We know them for the ColecoVision, obviously, their video game system. But did you know that the Coleco Toy Company also made the Cabbage Patch Kid? That's right. Coleco made the Cabbage Patch Kid. Just look on the side of the box. So, okay, 1986, Nintendo of America releases the NES. Sega releases the Sega Master System, and Atari releases the 7800, which did not do well. 7800 was the last straw for Atari. It crashed because everybody wanted the NES, whose graphics were a little bit ahead because of the number of bits, like 8-bit or 16-bit, whatever it was ahead of Atari. So Atari lost. In 1987, Nintendo publishes The Legend of Zelda. Never heard of that. In 1988, Squaresoft, another big game publishing company, puts out Final Fantasy. We're on Final Fantasy 911 now, but in that same year, Atari started releasing unlicensed games for the NES under the Tengen label. And Tonka Drugs acquires the U.S. distribution rights to the Sega Master System, and the company Coleco files for bankruptcy. NBC brings PC Engine to the United States and releases it as the TurboGrafx. They had good carts. The TurboGrafx is actually one of the ones that's worth a ton of money now, if you can find it. Some call it TurboGrafx 16 because I guess it's 16-bit. That was in 1989. Oh no, nope, that was in where is it? I lost it. Late 80s. And in 1989, Nintendo releases Game Boy. I had one. Now, first off, it eats batteries like nothing else. It's insane. And yeah, I guess you could have used rechargeable. They also came out with a thing where you could connect up to 4 Game Boys together to play a game together. But my problem with the Game Boy was that I couldn't see it. The graphics was so weird, you know? I couldn't, because of my eyesight, I couldn't see it. I had my wrestling game on it, and I liked it. I liked my wrestling game, but unfortunately I couldn't see it well enough to play it. I think eventually I gave my Game Boy, my Game Boy case, the whole thing, to someone else because I couldn't see it. Nintendo and Atari go to court over the rights to Tetris in 1990. And Super Mario Bros. 3 is released. The most successful non-bundled game cartridge of all time. What that means is they didn't bundle it. They didn't put the cartridge in with the system. Super NES is released in 1991. Sega recreates itself with a new mascot, Sonic the Hedgehog. I was playing Sonic in the 80s, late 80s, because I wasn't in Northbridge in 91 and I was playing Sonic. So, I'm not sure. With Genesis outselling Super NES, Sega effectively takes control of the US console market. Sega ships Sega CD peripheral for Genesis game console. This is in 92. In 93, Panasonic marketed the 3DO. That's another one of those that is worth a bundle if you can find it today. The Neo Geo came out in 1990 by SNK. Another highly sought after one. Atari launches the 64-bit Jaguar in 1993. This system is worth like $1,000 now. As a matter of fact, a brand new one, still in the box, was found by auctioneer Robert Zaba about a year ago or less in a hoarder house. I can't even imagine what that sold for. AJ Styles also found one in a video game store, which he paid a pretty penny for. Robert also found games for the Jaguar, so you know. And the game Myst was published by Broadband, which is a well-known software company. But that was published for Macs. And Doom came out that year. Nintendo releases Donkey Kong Country, and Wii takes control of the US console market in 1994. Sega releases the 32X, a peripheral that increases the power of the Genesis. Sega released the Sega Saturn in Japan, and Sony released the PlayStation in Japan in 1994. And in 1995, Sega released the Saturn in the US, and Sony released the original PlayStation in the US. In 1996, Nintendo hit a milestone. They sold its 1 billionth, with a B, cartridge game worldwide. Atari gets sold to disk drive manufacturer JTS. Nintendo released Virtual Boy in 1995 and unveils the 64-bit Nintendo 64 game console in Japan. When did that come out in the US? Sega discontinued Saturn in 1997. In 1998, Pokemon, a role-playing game that had ignited a craze in Japan, comes to America and does the same thing. Sega releases the Dreamcast in 1999, and in 2001 they discontinue it after even setting up a website for it. Yikes. Sony launched PlayStation 2 in 2000. So basically, this goes up to 2001. So it doesn't have any of the newer consoles, but it's so interesting because this thing actually starts in 1889. And a lot of those consoles are... Ugh. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about my history with games, okay? Now that I read you some of the timeline, thank you to the author, Stephen L. Kent, and all his wonderful research. I had an Atari when I was a kid. Had Atari 2600, 5600. Don't know if I had the 78. Probably. I had most of the games. I had, let's see, the Nintendo. I don't think I had the Super Nintendo or the Nintendo 64, although my mother seems to think I did. What I did not have was the Sega Genesis, which I wanted. Because I was actually much better at it than I was the Nintendo because of the rounded handles. The controls were rounded. I'll see if I can find a picture, if I remember. Versus the square handles of the Nintendo. Well, the rectangle. Everybody knows the rectangle handles of the Nintendo. They're like this, only cut it in half, like that. And so they were harder for me to deal with, especially going from a joystick and button configuration. Yeah. But yeah, our favorite game on the Atari, we had, let's see, several favorites, but we played Donkey Kong on the Atari. We played River Raid, was a family favorite. We all played River Raid. My uncle, my cousins, my mom, my dad, me. My parents would play it after I went to bed. Trying to think. We also played a game that required the Atari paddles. Paddles had the one red button, and they had a knob that just kind of turned back and forth. And this game was called Egger. And your goal was to go back and forth across the bottom of the screen using the paddle, catching eggs as they're being thrown at you from above in your hat. And every egg you don't catch piles up egg goop. And if you get the goop piled up above your head, the guts of an egg, piled up above your head, you lose. But it was really cool. We played Frogger. My mother was genius at Frogger. She was genius at Mario. She was genius at Marble Madness. Or Mercury Madness, I'm not sure which. I think it was Marble Madness. She just was naturally good at stuff. She never gave herself nearly enough credit. That's why I have the Nintendo today and the Atari, the flashback ones. I got the PS2 for nothing. I inherited it, That was the first, well, no, that was the second game system that I ever had that took compact discs. First was the Wii. We had a Wii that we ended up giving to installing the software update on my iPad. I'm gonna say, I don't remember. Oh, we had a Wii. That's where I was going. And we actually, when I got cancer in my arm and couldn't do it anymore for a long time, we sold the Wii and all the games to GameStop. And years later, a friend of my mother's gave me the Wii that I have now. And I was glad to see that it was a first generation Wii, because that means that you can play GameCube games on it, which GameCube is not mentioned there, so it must have been later than 2001, which I didn't think it was. And Wii must have been later than 2001, because that's not mentioned there either. At any rate, we also had the Atari computer. This particular Atari computer was a keyboard that you hooked up to a TV, and it did have a slot for cartridges. It could do different things. We did have a couple of cartridges, but mostly we used it, my mother did programs, 10 go to 20, 20 go to 10, 30 blah blah blah, and then it would tell it to go back and forth, and what it would do is change the color or make crazy stuff happen on the screen, and she could do all that, and us kids would just be like, no stinking way, you know. Again, my mother was brilliant, although I guess she just read the book, but I loved that little thing. We had, like I said, I didn't have the Sega Genesis, however, my neighbor did. He had several systems. He had the Genesis, the Nintendo, I believe he had the Super NES, and he had all sorts of peripherals. So, including fancy controllers. Both that big controller for the Genesis and the big controller for the Nintendo, which he let me borrow, and it broke. My mother was like, I will buy him a new one. And his mother was like, no, don't worry about it. I got it. Because they were good friends, you know. And we were neighbors. And even he said it was ready to fail, you know, obviously. So nobody was mad at me. And I didn't break it intentionally. It failed. And so yeah, that was no big deal. And but I did like it a lot. I wanted that really bad because it had a real joystick, and I actually did much better with it. I had the Three Stooges game, and we were throwing pies across a big, long, exaggeratedly long table in this big, exaggeratedly long and narrow dining room, and you're throwing pies back and forth, and you get points for hitting people with pies. I'm sure that there were other levels, but I would come home from school and that's what I would play. We played Mario Brothers all the time. All the different Mario Brothers, 1, 2, 3. And matter of fact, when I first got my Nintendo, we got the one with the Olympics on it that had the pad. This wasn't a dance pad, you know, a Dance Revolution pad. This was a run your ass off pad for the Olympics. Or be going like this to try to ski down the hill, or whatever the case. And it was killing my cousin and I, more me. And my mother said, and my Aunt Holly said, let's disconnect that. Let's take it back. Let's get the other one. So we got the other one, which came with Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt on the same cartridge. Much better. I was actually pretty good at Duck Hunt. I really enjoyed Sonic. But I thank my friend Robbie for, you know, getting me into it. You know, every time I see AJ Styles and he's talking about gaming, I think of Robbie. Because he and AJ would be about the same age. So, but yeah. So those were the games I played, and then we played games on the computer. In fact, one of the most successful computer games, and one of the earliest, was a game called Oregon Trail, where you actually go on the Oregon Trail. You migrate in your covered wagon, and you go through all the things that they went through, the diseases and the, you know, accidents, and the you have a family. And if you've ever watched Young Sheldon, he plays it. And I used to play it. I usually ended up dead halfway on the trail, but I think we all did. What else? When I was in school, the very first thing I ever did on a computer, first computer I ever touched, we would play Wheel of Fortune. After we did our work, we'd go play Wheel of Fortune on the computer. When we first got a computer in our classroom, I think it was in 6th grade, in the resource room, in order to boot up the computer, you had to put a DOS disk in. Then you had to remove the DOS disk and put the disk in for the game. When I was in high school, it was the same thing. You had to boot up with DOS. I used to sit and type and write, like with the word processor and stuff, and just have a ball writing stories. And so I would sit in Carol, and do that. And behind me and off to the side were a row of systems, and there was another like 1 or 2 systems in Carol's next to me. And people would be playing SimCity. It was huge in 92, 93, sort of 91, 92 era, that sort of 93, that sort of era, 91 to 93. It was huge on the computer. So, but for me, I would sit there and type and write stories and print them out on the dot matrix printer. Okay, for those of you not old enough, let me go back. A lot of what we use the computer for, first stuff that I learned on the computer in junior high school was word processing. Word processing, databases, spreadsheets. It was all part of a program called AppleWorks that we did. AppleWorks even had the ability to interconnect a bunch of computers. It could do things that would blow your mind, at the time. Because it had networking ability, which 1987, 1988, who even knew what that word meant? But we had it because we had AppleWorks. We didn't use that part of it. We used the spreadsheet, the database, and the word processor, and the banner and sign maker. But I enjoyed doing it, and I became very proficient at it. And so in 8th grade, because you weren't supposed to touch the IBMs until high school, my teacher had me come in after school or on lunch break or whatever it was, and he would sit me at the IBMs and he taught me WordPerfect, which is a completely different animal. But he knew they weren't going to let me come in 9th grade because they started doing programming at that point. And and you need better math skills than I had to do programming. So he said, I'll teach you. I'm like, cool. And I wish I could have thanked Mr. Wheeler because he changed my life by encouraging me on the computer and letting me sit on the computer for, learn the IBM and sit on the Apple for after school for, and all of that. And then, of course, it helped me with the school newspaper because we had the Apple IIe, I believe it was, upstairs in the office, and I would sit there and type on that. And, so he fostered in me a love for this thing here, the computer, this thing here. He couldn't have imagined what was coming, but he fostered that in me early, 7th grade, 13 years old. It's like, I love it, and I knew that I wanted to be a part of that. I think even more so than video games. And there are lots of video games for the computer, which I actually kind of prefer because I like they have a genre of games, of mystery games, where you go through different rooms and you have to find certain objects, and you have to in some cases you have have to find enough of the objects in the room and put together the puzzles to escape the room. And then you go into the next room and you just do the same thing over again. And you, in some of these games, you'll have, as you're going through the world that you're in, you can go back to other rooms to solve puzzles once you've gotten something that you need to do something in the room you were just in the next room or the next outside pavilion or whatever it may be. And you eventually solve the entire room, and then, but you may have to go to 3 different areas to get all the stuff that you need to solve that room. So it's not, some are escape rooms where once you escape, you escape. But some are, you're going forward but have to go back because you need to pick up the items you need in order to solve the puzzle or get the thing that's locked in something. You know, you need a coin to get something out of a machine, or you need a key, or you need a scalpel to cut a fake person, you know, whatever it may be. And I recently beat one of those. All the way through. All the way through. I'm actually on the 2nd game of it. So that's really cool. Anyway, you get those on the iPad. I get those. Oh. So yeah, for me it's computer games, and I actually buy 10 packs of those mystery games, and they have little mini find all the object games in them, and you can tell it's going to be one of those because it will, the spot that you go to for it will like sparkle, these like sparkles coming out of it. I don't know how else to explain it. Little gold sparkles. You click on that and you end up inside a cupboard, for example, getting all the stuff on your list. And some of the stuff will actually go into your inventory, but most of the stuff won't. And at the end, you'll get the item that you need from that cupboard after you've found all the stuff you need to find. There are also puzzles that you have to do. Some are easier than others. You can get hints. So. Okay. Anyway. So yeah, those I highly recommend, and those I'm really good at. I can literally sit for hours and do those. That's why I'm ordering another one soon. So, you can't really do that in a video game on a console. You could almost do it on like a Wii. And PlayStation has and as does Xbox, a thing to compete with the Wii and Wii U and the Switch. Xbox has what's called a Kinect for both the 360 and the Xbox One. Kinect with a K. And it allows you movement with certain games. I guess Kinect was not terribly popular with the 360, or at least not the game Kinect Adventures. I don't know about other games. They also have the dance games with the dance pad that you hook up to thing, and PlayStation has a little camera and these things that look like microphones that light up, that a white ball lights up on the top, that are like Wii controllers. I don't remember what it's called for PlayStation, but um, I think it's PlayStation 3 and up that has it, because I don't think PlayStation 2 has it. So yeah, it's fun. It truly is. So yeah, I just wanted to tell you about my history with gaming. Um, I'm not very good at it. Oh, and of course, played Pac-Man. And when I was a kid, there was a Pac-Man cartoon. There was a Kubert cartoon. Um, Mario Brothers had a show where Captain Lou was Mario. So yeah, fun. Those were good times. So thank you so much for joining me. God bless you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Mwah. Please subscribe. We're trying to get to that 100 mark. Bye, guys.